Hello and good evening and welcome to Varsity Maine Live for the Portland Press Herald. I am Travis Lazarzik, and as always, we are sponsored by Central Maine Power. Tonight we have no guests. We just have a lot of high school championships this weekend to get to. So I am joined by Mike Mandel of the Central Maine newspapers, the Kennebec Journal and Morning Sentinel, and from the forecaster, Michael Hoffer. Guys, welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Let's get right into it. We have three big field hockey state championships this weekend. These games are all going to be at Messalonskee High School in Oakland. We'll take them in the order that they're going to be played on Saturday, and we'll begin with Class C. We have Winthrop and MCI, and Mike Mandel, this is a rematch of last year's state championship game, two Central Maine teams that I'm sure you've covered. Tell us about Winthrop and MCI.
Well, Winthrop won this matchup last year. They brought, I think, a slew of starters back from that 21 state championship team, including one of the premier scorers and I guess distributors in the state in Madeline Wagner, who has 35 goals and 17 assists this year. Just a very prolific player, but also on the defensive side, they had some games this year where they gave up 3 or 4 goals, but they've gone 7 games without giving up a goal leading into this, and have won, I believe, not 8 or 9 straight ever since their last loss to Spruce Mountain. MCI, who I had the fortune of covering yesterday, their 2-0 win against Dirigo in the C North final down in Gardner. They talk about a team for the flair for the dramatic. They've before that game they had beaten Mountview and Dexter in overtime just to get there, and so now they're facing a Winthrop team, that has just won their last game in overtime. So it's going to be interesting because you're going to have two high-flying, fast teams, but also teams that might be a little bit winded after playing some some exhausting overtime games. So it'll be interesting how it shakes out.
Great. Thank you, Mike. That game's going to be at 11 a.m. at Messalonskee. Followed by the Class B game, we have Freeport versus Lawrence. Michael Hoffer, Freeport has kind of run the gauntlet in the B South tournament to beat number 2 Cape Elizabeth and then number 1 York in the 100th round or something of penalty corners. What can you tell us about Freeport?
Well, I think a lot of people feel like they're a year ahead of schedule. I mean, this is a team that's rife with freshmen, and this freshman group, though, has been terrific, and they've really come a long way in a short time. Anna Machino, who finally scored in that 7th round of penalty corners yesterday to give Freeport the win, she's a freshman. Emily Groves, the team's leading scorer, is a freshman. Piper Williams, the goalie, is actually a junior. She's been a senior. She's been a big part of their success. Obviously made a ton of big saves yesterday against York, but Freeport hadn't won a regional title in 22 years. They've had a lot of really good teams over the years, and they had never even beaten York until this regular season. The second meeting, they finally solved them, and I think it gave them some confidence going into the tournament. And they managed to. Anytime you beat York in the tournament, it's a big deal. Freeport's been to the state game twice before. Both times it was way back last century in Class C. This is their first time in Class B, and that they're looking for their first ever crown against a Lawrence team that's been as good as anyone, I think, all season. Maybe down here we don't know that much about them, but Mike, I'm sure you know a little bit about them, and I think Freeport's probably got their hands full with that game. It should be a good one.
Yeah, Mike, tell us about this Lawrence team. Feels like they've been on the cusp of this for a few years now.
Well, Travis, if you had told me before last night that Lawrence would give up 3 goals and that Maddie Niles wouldn't score, I'd say that they'd be in a lot of trouble against Belfast. But they got 1 goal each from 4 other players, and they did just enough down the stretch after Belfast tied the game up with 3 minutes left, or went down 1 goal with 3 minutes left. And you're absolutely right. It felt. I think talking to some players last night, they felt that this was something they had hoped they could do last year. They fell 1 game short. But they're back in it this year. They first regional championship in school history for that program, and it's interesting these kinds of games because it's one of those things where you look at a B North team and a B South team that have really 0 common opponents. You can try to nitpick in the schedule and find one thing or two about how so-and-so did against so-and-so, but it's really a clean slate. And it's probably going to be a game where we're not really quite sure how they're going to match up until we're maybe 10, 15 minutes into it. And you know what? Those games are the most fun.
Definitely. Thank you. And finally, in that day at Messalonskee High School on Saturday, we have Class A, Cheverus and Skowhegan. The game everyone's pretty much expected since practices started in August. Both undefeated. This is a rematch of last season's state championship. But Mike Mandel, Skowhegan almost didn't make this game for the first time in over 2 decades. Tell us kind of how they snuck out their win over Oxford Hills in the regional final yesterday.
Well, so this game was going on, droning on in front of me while I was typing up my MCI game story. But I was able to kind of catch a good glimpse of it over the last few minutes. Oxford Hills, you're right. Oxford Hills was leading this game late. Skowhegan scored, I believe, with 8 or 9 minutes left in regulation, tied at 2, and then they got the winning goal in overtime. And it's interesting how I just mentioned how Lawrence, they had maybe weren't quite as strong defensively as they were early in the season yesterday. Well, Skowhegan had only given up 2 goals all season, and they gave up 2 to Oxford Hills. But at the same time, this is a Skowhegan team that returns, I think, pretty much everybody from last year. So it's a group that really knows how to persevere in these situations. And even if they were in a situation in which maybe they felt as if they shouldn't have been, they found a way to pull it out. But it's going to take a lot more of them to beat this Cheverus team, which is just a juggernaut. And it feels weird to say that about a Skowhegan team that's been just the preeminent power in Maine field hockey for 2 or 3 decades now, but that's the truth, and it'll be interesting to see how. But you can never ever count Paula Dowdy out of a championship game, and I'm sure they'll have something. I'm sure she'll have something planned up to give Cheverus a run for their money.
No doubt, Michael. You've seen the Cheverus team quite a bit. What do they bring to the table that makes them so dominant?
They are. If they finish the job Saturday, I would pose that they are the best team in the history of Maine state field hockey, honestly, at the high school level. They've outscored the opposition 138 goals to 6 this year. They haven't really been seriously tested all season. I think 5 goals is the lowest they've scored in a game. If they win on Saturday, it'll be 40 straight victories. This is a team that was utterly dominant last year, and this year's team has taken it to another level. Last year they quote unquote only outscored the opposition 99-9. This year's team has scored almost 40 more goals than that already. And the thing with them, with Cheverus, is you really can't focus on one player. Yes, Lucy Johnson is absolutely transcendent. She scored 40-plus goals this year, but her older sister, Lily Johnson, just does it all in the midfield. Great defender, does more setting up than scoring herself, but she can score goals too. Taylor Torrey missed a few games in the middle of the season. She's back scoring a lot of goals. Mackenzie Cash has stepped up during the playoffs. And this is just a team that, they've been wearing the bullseye all year, but unlike some teams that kind of buckle under that pressure, they wear it well, they embrace it. And I think they know that they're on the brink of doing something special and historic. But boy, if you're Skowhegan, you really couldn't ask for a better situation, I think. This is the team that is always wearing the bullseye. And suddenly you're a major underdog. I think everyone's been talking about Cheverus since day one this year. You had a lopsided loss to Cheverus in last year's state game. So, really, you're kind of playing with house money going into this if you're Paula Dowdy. And, she's going to make the most of that. But, if Cheverus comes out and plays their game and gets the shots they're used to getting, they're going to be really tough to dethrone.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Those are the 3 field hockey state championship games this Saturday at Messalonskee High School in Oakland. We don't have a guest, but we do have athletes of the week as always. And those will begin with Baylor Wilkinson of Biddeford Volleyball. She finished with 6 blocks and 3 aces as the Tigers swept Gorham in the Class A state championship match to complete a 17-0 season. It was Biddeford's first volleyball title since 2010. Jack Banks from Brunswick Boys Soccer, he's a senior captain, and he scored 3 goals as the Dragons defeated Lewiston 6-0 in the Class A North Final. It was the second straight regional championship, I should say, for Brunswick, who plays Scarborough on Saturday for the state title. Layla Conway, Skowhegan Field Hockey, her overtime goal lifted the Riverhawks past Oxford Hills as Skowhegan claimed its goal 21st consecutive Class A North championship. Carter Libby, Gray New Gloucester Cross Country, after finishing 3rd in the Class B South Championship, Libby cut his time by 31 seconds, survived a fall on the final turn, and beat a competitive field to win the Class B State Championship at Twin Brook in Cumberland on Saturday. Brooke Bells, Winthrop Field Hockey, the Rambler senior scored the only goal late in the second overtime of the Class C South Final against Lisbon, sending the defending state champions back to the state title game. Andrew Poulin of Winslow Boys Soccer, the senior striker, finished with 50 goals this season, too shy of tying the state record set by Damon Warren of Sumner in 2018. Ruth White, Orono Cross Country. We've mentioned her before on this show. She's the defending New England champion, and she showed once again the best among a strong group of female cross country runners in Maine when she won the Class C title in 18 minutes, 2.52 seconds, 49 seconds faster than Class B winner Carrie Drake of York, and 62 seconds faster than the Class A winner Abby Thibodeau of Bonnie Eagle. All three girls winners led their teams to state titles. Addie Watson of Maranacook girls soccer, the senior striker, scored 2 goals in a regional semifinal against Old Orchard Beach, 2 more in the Class C South final against Waynfleet, as undefeated Maranacook will try to win its second straight state championship on Saturday. Mike Mandel, what can you tell us about Addie and the Black Bears as they go for another gold ball?
It was a team that's had a lot of retooling to do after the loss of Emily Harper last year, but they went right out and did it. They're undefeated. Their only losses, their only failure to win this season was a tie against Morris earlier in the year. But they've just come back and they've done what they do. They're prepared for this. I mean, it was the same way. I remember because I covered Bucksport last year when they went to play Maranacook in the state championship game. And Maranacook, by the time they reached that game, they've played a mostly Class B schedule, so they've been playing some of the tough teams already. And it's kind of a similar thing this year. I think this year's team has a great balance to it. They're going to be back against a Bucksport team on Saturday that has a pretty similar roster to last year and probably has a bitter taste in their mouth after they dominated the whole season to get there. So it'll be interesting to see how that one stacks up Saturday at Hamden Academy.
Okay, thank you. Aiden McGowan, Portland football. He had a 72-yard kickoff return for a touchdown in a 42-14 quarterfinal win over Noble. The Bulldogs advanced to play Kennebunk on Friday night in the Class B South semifinal. Cara Woods from Deergo Field Hockey. She scored 5 goals in the Cougars' 2 playoff wins, including 4 in the Class C North quarterfinals against Piscataquis and another goal in a semifinal victory over Foxcroft Academy. Charlie Collins from Hamden Academy Cross Country. He's a senior, and he turned in the fastest time at Saturday's State Cross Country Championships to win the Class A race in 16 minutes, 29.57 seconds to lead Hamden to its second straight team championship. Anna Vinicotto, Yarmouth volleyball. The outside hitter never came off the court for the Clippers in the Class B state championship match, contributing defense, passing, and 7 kills in a 3-set victory over Gardner. Yarmouth has won 4 consecutive Class B titles. Anna Machino, Freeport Field Hockey. Machino scored in the 7th round of penalty corners to break a scoreless stalemate, giving the Falcons their first Class B South title and first trip to a state championship game in 22 years. Mike Hoffer, we kind of talked about her a little already, but she's just one of this great freshman class that Freeport has right now, isn't she?
Absolutely, Travis. And you just don't know who on a given night is going to be the hero. I mean, like I said earlier, Emily Groves has been a leading scorer for Freeport all season. She had 3 goals in the win over Cape Elizabeth. But, on a day where no one could score in 60 minutes of regulation and 16 more minutes of overtime and then 6 rounds of penalty corners, I think Freeport would have taken a goal from anybody. And it just happened to be a Machina was in the right place at the right time and gave Freeport their biggest win in 22 years. So it makes you wonder who the hero is going to be on Saturday if they indeed win their first ever state title.
Great. Thank you. Finally, we have a coaching milestone of note. Joe Rafferty from Kennebunk football. The Rams' win on Friday was Rafferty's 400th career game as varsity football coach, all of them at Kennebunk, where he's led the program for 44 years. Rafferty's career record is 217 wins, 183 losses. John Wolfgram, with 402 career games, is the only other Maine football coach who has surpassed the 400 milestone. So if Rafferty and his Rams are to beat Portland on Friday night, he'll have a chance to tie Coach Wolfgram for that. So congratulations to Coach Rafferty. Guys, we have 8 soccer state championships this weekend. Some of them will be at Hamden Academy. Some of them will be at Deering High School in Portland. Let's go down through the girls' games first, starting with the Class D game. We have Penobscot Valley versus North Yarmouth Academy. That's at Deering High School. And Michael, you've been following NYA all season. They're just going for their 4th straight title?
That's correct. Their 4th straight title. And this might be the best NYA team of them all. Let's not forget, they beat Yarmouth for the first time ever, Yarmouth being the Class B South champion, and they beat them 4-1 back in the regular season. This is just an absolutely dominant team led by Angel Huntsman with a lot of help. Really, just a lot of fun to watch, and they've had a single goal all season to go undefeated and win a state title, go unbeaten and untied, which they haven't done yet, and they're on the brink of doing so. And they're just a lot of fun to watch. And I wish Penobscot Valley luck because I know how good this NYA team, and it's going to be really tough to knock them off.
Sure. Okay, in Class C girls, we have Marana Cook versus Bucksport. This is a rematch of last year's state game. This is going to be at Hamden Academy on Saturday afternoon. Mike Mandel, we talked about Marana Cook a little bit. You covered this Bucksport team last year. What, if anything, do you know about this team? I know I'm probably putting you on the spot a little bit.
Well, Ella Hosford last year broke Maine single season scoring record with 63 goals in a season. And she's back, as well as 9 other starters from that team. They did lose Johanna Stiles, who's one of the state's faster players. They did lose Alyssa McGuire, who was a key piece in the midfield. But the rest of the team is back. It's tough in Maine. It's tough in Northern Maine. I don't think they go through quite the gauntlet that these Southern Maine teams do. Marana Cook, again, we've talked about how I just kind of mentioned how they've played by this point mostly a Class B schedule. But I do think they're a little bit better than they were last year. And Miranda Cook, while being a bit more balanced, maybe it isn't the same unbeatable group that they had last year that just looked destined for a championship. I remember covering that game on a very cold November afternoon, all the way up in Presque Isle at 9:30 in the morning. So it'll be an interesting matchup. It'll be an interesting matchup for sure, and I'm definitely intrigued to see how that one plays out.
Okay, thank you. Class B, we have Yarmouth girls taking on Herman. Herman's back in the state game for the 4th time since 2012, but they have yet to win a state title. Yarmouth back for the first time since 2017 when they won the second of back-to-back titles. Michael Hover, we saw Yarmouth yesterday really pull out a tight win over York. This Herman team looks like they have some scores, so it could be another high-scoring game.
Absolutely. And I think Yarmouth knows they're going to be in for a battle. And, just the way Class B South kind of shook out wasn't really what any of us expected. I think everyone thought, at the very least, Cape Elizabeth would get to the regional final. But, that team was decimated by illness. And York went in there and you had the big upset win last weekend. And then York proved they weren't a fluke. I mean, they took Yarmouth to the wire. They scored a couple beautiful goals. But Yarmouth has Ava Feely and no one else does. And you could make the argument that Feely might be the best player in the state. She's certainly on the short list. She scored 2 beautiful goals, and I thought she scored 2 more, as did you. I know, Travis. She had a couple of beautiful shots that weren't counted, but good luck slowing her down for 80 minutes because she doesn't need much room. She's deadly on free kicks. She gets, any kind of room within 40 yards, she's going to bury shots. And, Yarmouth hasn't won in 5 years. You could make the argument they've been the second best team in Class B each of the last 4 years. They just couldn't beat Cape Elizabeth in the playoffs. But now's their chance. A team with a lot of seniors that are very hungry. And, Herman's been there. They haven't been able to get over the hump. And the problem is they're playing great teams like Falmouth back in the day, Cape Elizabeth in recent years. And now it's Yarmouth's turn to make a run at the title. But I think this is going to be a competitive game, and it might come down to the wire like last night's game did.
Yeah, Herman's undefeated, 17-0 again, so we will see. And then finally, in Class A girls, we have Brunswick versus Scarborough. These both undefeated teams, while Brunswick is 15-0-2, Scarborough 17-0. These teams feel like they're always in this mix, but Scarborough hasn't won a state title since 2012. Right. Brunswick hasn't won one since 2009. Michael, tell us about these teams. I know you saw Scarborough the other night.
Yeah, Brunswick, they've done a great job to get back. It was a very tough region this year. There were a lot of good teams. Camden Hills has dominated that region over the last 5 years, and they scored the first goal against Brunswick in the regional final last night, and then Brunswick took over from there. The interesting thing is, yes, Scarborough's got this great pedigree. They were in the state game every year from 2017 to 2019, but they only have one player who played in that most recent state game, and that's Allie McCrisky, who was a freshman that year. So really, Brunswick has the edge in big game experience. But this Scarborough team, they have passed every challenge this year. Class A South, they beat every opponent during the regular season except Gorham. And then when they finally got a crack at Gorham in that highly touted battle of unbeatens the other night, Lana Juranovic scores in the 3rd minute on an absolutely crazy goal that she lofted about 100 feet in the air. It went over the goalie's head and in. And then Allie McCrisky with just two absolute bombs, almost identical. I call them carbon copy goals. And like you said, Travis, most people don't know what carbon copies are anymore, but that's what they were. And then if that's not enough, Julia Black, their senior captain, who's a back, also with a deadly shot. She scored on a pretty free kick. So, Scarborough's really clicking on all cylinders right now. I can't really speak that well of Brunswick because I just don't know them that well, but I feel like they're going to come down here and be very hungry, and it's going to be a great matchup. That's the game that wraps everything up on Saturday, and it might be the best of the day.
Yeah, Brunswick has a couple of pure scorers, and sophomore Alexis Morin, who's got, I think, 30 goals. Freshman Molly Teft has a lot of goals. So they've got the offense. It's just a question of, do they have the defense that can slow down this really good Scarborough team?
Yeah, easier said than done.
Exactly. Okay, we have 4 boys state championship games, starting with Class D boys. Madawaska versus NYA. Madawaska making the long drive from the county to Portland. This is Madawaska's first trip to the state game since they were in Class C in 2013. NYA was runner-up in last season, and then in 2019. Michael, what can you tell us about these NYA boys?
They've come a long way. I saw them opening day, and Wainfleet took it to them pretty good. And I think at one point this season they were 2-5, so they've really closed strong. They played a tough schedule. They played Yarmouth. They made a point of playing some teams in bigger classes just to get them prepped for the tournament. And once the playoffs began, they were ready to go. And even though they had to go on the road for a couple of games, they took care of business. This is a team. A lot of different guys can score. They're really solid up and down the field, and they're playing their best soccer when it matters most. And after falling short these last couple of visits, they're ready to take care of business. Madawaska has a heck of a long trip. I assume they're going to come down on Friday night as opposed to Saturday, since that's the early game. But I think NYA certainly has to feel good about their chances going into this.
Okay. Class C state boys game. This is going to be at Hamden Academy on Saturday afternoon at 3. We have Wainfleet and Fort Kent. Mike Mandel, I know you're going to be covering this game, but you probably haven't had a chance to see either of these teams.
No, I have not. But Wainfleet's one of those schools you can never really that you can kind of always expect to be there. I think a lot of us in our varsity Maine polls have had them ranked throughout the year. And Fort Kent, you talk about another school that has to make a long trip, pretty much wherever they go, just because of their location, all the way up there in what's basically Canada. And they've been in this position a lot too, where they've been in these state games. So it's really cool how you bring in two totally different parts of Maine. Wainfleet being a richer private school in Portland, and Fort Kent from a part of the state, that's just a different world to a lot of people, and they get to come together and play it out in the field. It's really kind of cool how sports bring people from all around the state together in these ways.
Yeah, this is a rematch of games from 21 and 2018, so should be an interesting one. Class B boys, Yarmouth's back in the state game for the first time in a few years, and they'll be taking on John Baptist. Michael Hoffer, we saw this Yarmouth team on Wednesday afternoon at Lewiston in the regional final win a really tight game over Cape Elizabeth. But this team just, we talk about teams that are battle tested and ready for big games. Yarmouth is certainly at the top of that list.
Yeah, no question. I mean, they've really become the gold standard program in the state. If you look at the past decade, they won 4 in a row between 2014 and 17. They got upset in the 2018 playoffs, and then they turned around and won again in 2019 and last year. And I mean, really, this wasn't supposed to be their year, Travis. Cape Elizabeth took it to them in the regular season. Yarmouth lost twice. They tied twice. They don't have a prolific scorer this year. They don't have someone like a Miles Cully from Wainfleet that's setting records. But this team has great balance, and what they have that most teams just really can't approach is they don't panic when games get tight. They don't panic when they fall behind. They dig into the reservoir of championship heart, and never was that better evidence than yesterday up in Lewiston against Cape. They fall behind 1-0 early. They fall behind 2-1 at halftime. But they just kept coming and coming. They're great on set pieces. And when the game is hanging in the balance, they believe that they're going to make a play to win. And, the South/West has absolutely dominated the Class B state games over the last 30 years. I think since 1993, the North or the East has only won 1. Yarmouth is going for the 12th state title in Mike Haggerty's 26 years as coach. They're going for their 7th and 8th postseasons. And, once they got past that Cape Elizabeth test, because I think Cape Elizabeth was as good as anyone. And I think once Yarmouth passed that test, I think the opportunity to dethrone them has now passed.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Finally, the Class A boys game is Brunswick versus Scarborough, just like the girls game. Scarborough going for the first title since 2013. Brunswick, their first since 1999. It's hard to believe that Brunswick hasn't won a state title since 1999. They were in this game last year, losing to an upstart Marshwood team. Michael, tell us about Scarborough. We saw them win a really tight overtime game against Wyndham on Tuesday night down in Sanford for the regional crown.
Yeah, I mean, for a while, between 2003 and 2015, Scarborough it seemed like they were in the state game every year, and they won a lot of gold balls in that stretch. But they haven't been to a state game now in 7 years. That's a long drought by Scarborough standards. And I think ever since the season started, this is where they thought they would be. They won their first 13 games. Then they got knocked off by Deering in the finale, and maybe people thought they were a little vulnerable, but no. And they had some tough playoff tests. I mean, they had to get by Falmouth as a 9 seed. That's not an easy quarterfinal, but they won that game. Gorham is a 4 seed, a very, very good team. They won that game in the semis. And then Wyndham took them to the brink the other day. What a great ending to that game. It looked like Scarborough had it won. They're up a goal with 3 minutes left. Wyndham ties it up, and then both teams had great chances in overtime. And then, frankly, Scarborough got a lucky break, but sometimes you make your own luck, and they buried that winning goal. And now they have a chance to end, what most schools would kill for, but a 7-year drought. But Brunswick, here they are, just like the girls. They were here last year. They feel like they missed out on a golden opportunity last season when they lost to Marshwood. They have an excellent team too. I think both Class A games are going to be terrific. I look forward to both of those.
I do too. Okay, thank you. We have polls. These are voted on by varsitymaine.com sports writers from around the state. We'll go over these real quickly because we still have some football playoff games to get to. Starting with field hockey, number 1, no surprise, Cheverus getting all first place votes. They got 6 of them with 60 points. Number 2, Skowhegan with 54 points. Number 3, Lawrence at 47 points. Number 4, Oxford Hills with 37. And number 5, Freeport with 26. Boys soccer, Scarborough's number 1 with all 7 first place votes and 70 points, followed by Brunswick, Yarmouth, Wyndham, and Cape Elizabeth. Girls soccer, Scarborough number 1 there as well with all 7 first place votes and 70 points, followed by Brunswick, Gorham, Wyndham, and a tie at 5th place with Herman and Yarmouth. So we'll settle that tie on the field on Saturday morning. And finally, football, Oxford Hills, all 8 first place votes and 80 points. Number 2 is Thornton Academy. Number 3 is Levitt. Number 4, Skowhegan. And number 5, Coney. Guys, a lot of high school football regional playoffs this weekend. Let's hit the 8-man games first because these are regional championships. In the South Large Division, we have Yarmouth versus Mount Ararat. They're both 7-1. Mount Ararat's loss was to Morse way back in week 1. They've kind of rolled through the schedule since. Yarmouth's one loss was to Mount Ararat in the regular season finale. In the North, we have Waterville going to Mount Desert Island. Waterville's trying to get back to the state game. Mike Mandela, you've covered Waterville, and I think you covered Mount Desert Island last year. So break this game down for us a little bit.
Waterville and MDI have played 3 times since their move down to 8-man, and all 3 times have been battles. In the regular season game a year ago, they were down 22-8, had to come back and win it in overtime. In the semifinals, in last year, it was a 50-40 Waterville win in a game which Liam Von Osen, I believe, gave an interview where he said he was the most exhausted he'd ever been in his life after the win. And then this year, they go into MDI and they win a 26-20 game. MDI has been on a roll since they lost to a good Yarmouth team the next week, but ever since that loss, they've won 5 in a row. They've averaged, I think, 47 points a game over those 5 wins. They secured the number 1 seed after Waterville dropped their season finale to Camden Hills, and you have to think that after 3 close losses to this Waterville team, they're going to be chomping at the bit to finally get over that hump. And as you know, Travis, this used to be a big 11 game in the old Class C when these 2 teams there prior to their going to 8-man. And I remember even in 2019 it was a 15-14 Waterville win. So it's going to be an interesting one. It's one that I think both coaches will probably tell you will come down to the very end. Both teams have a lot of athletes, and it's going to be a good fight to see who goes and plays for the gold ball next weekend.
Definitely. Thank you, Mike. 8-man small, we have in the South, Old Orchard Beach coming off a win over undefeated Mountain Valley. They're going to be playing Dirigo. They're both 7-2. And in the North, Orono coming off a win over undefeated Dexter will be playing at Stearns. So we'll have a new state champion in both large and small 8-man. Of course, remember, Chevers went up to 11-man again after rolling through the 8-man large last year. Dexter beat Marana Cook in the state game last year. They're out. So those games will be this weekend to see who goes to the state games a week from now at Coney High School in Augusta. A couple 11-man games that interest me, guys. Bonnie Eagle versus Scarborough in Class A. This is the 5-4 game. And Mike Hoffer, I can't figure out Scarborough for the life of me. Some weeks they look undefeatable, like when they beat Bonnie Eagle early in the season, 33-21. And then some weeks they don't look like they can beat anybody.
Yeah, I think that Coach Pacquimelia would agree with you. I think, as soon as you think you have Scarborough figured out, they turn around and do the opposite the following week. And, maybe the fact that no one's really expecting much of them in the playoffs will work in their favor. But, I wouldn't want to have to beat a Kevin Cooper coach team twice in one season. And I know Scarborough won over there back in week 2. But I feel like, a lot of things are lining up in Bonnie Eagle's favor, not just Scarborough's unpredictability, but the fact that, they did lose previously. And these teams have produced some pretty memorable playoff games in recent years, including a state semifinal a few years ago that Bonnie Eagle won in overtime, and then they went on and upset Thornton Academy in the state game. So I know this isn't a vintage Bonnie Eagle team, but it's really hard to bet against a Kevin Cooper coach team in November.
Yeah, I agree. Class B South game that interests me. Number 3 South Portland 6-3. They're going to number 2 Massabesic, who's 7-2. This was kind of the game of the regular season. In week 3, Massabesic won 14-13 over the South Portland, where we kind of said, okay, maybe Massabesic can play. We knew South Portland could. So it's interesting to see how this rematch goes. In B North, Mike Mandel is an interesting one. That is a rematch from a game a couple of weeks ago. Number 4 Falmouth at number 1 Coney. Coney had to rally late in the fourth quarter and then beat Falmouth 35-28 in overtime to win the first game. What do you see coming out in this rematch?
Well, Falmouth had been battling injuries a lot earlier in the season, and one thing that's happened is they got a lot of their a lot of their players back. It's still not certain whether Peyton Mitchell, who is going to be their starting quarterback to begin the year, is going to be back. But regardless, Bia Lippert from Coney, who was a guest on the show earlier this year, told me, it's really not going to change Coney's game plan much either way, because they're really good in the run game. Finn Caxton Smith is a fast runner, and they have a very physical runner in Indy Backman, who, despite being a sophomore, is a very, very powerful back. Those two combined for 251 rushing yards in that game. And you're right. It was a game that Coney trailed. It was a game that Coney trailed by 8 late in the game. And had they not won that game, they could have fallen all the way to the 3, possibly even the 4 seeds, depending on how those Crabtree rankings would have broken out. Now Coney has won 6 in a row. That was the only game over that span that was a 1-score game. I have a feeling could be in for another one. And Coney, should they win that game, would set up for a very interesting rematch potentially with the Skowhegan team that beat it 28-0 earlier in the season.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Finally, a game in Class C South that's really interesting just because of some of the circumstances surrounding it. We got number 3 Cape Elizabeth going to number 2 Wells. Wells had last week off of the bye. Cape has like the exact opposite of a bye, Michael Hoffer, with a short turnaround. They played Monday because of illnesses that closed the school last Friday. Couldn't play Saturday because the field was taken up with 2 soccer games and a field hockey game. Cape, with as little prep time as they could ever get, what do you see happening here, Michael Hoffer?
Yeah, in a sense, it's like an NFL team having to turn around and play a Thursday night game. And let's just say there's not a lot of love lost between these two programs. Their rivalry goes back to, they played playoff games back in the day in Class B. Last year, Cape Elizabeth, on their way to the state title, they beat Wells 69-0 during the regular season. Well, Wells avenged that loss back in week 2 with a 28-21 home win. And that's the reason that they're the home team. And that's the reason that when Cape Elizabeth appealed to Wells to maybe get an extra day between games and play this game on Saturday, Wells, as was their want as the higher seed, they said, no, we're going to play it on Friday night. So, Cape Elizabeth finished off Freiburg Academy late Monday, and they've had very little turnaround time here. But I know they're going to be fired up because they're not happy about the fact that they have to play tomorrow instead of Saturday. But you know what? You got Nick Laughlin on your side. I certainly like Cape Elizabeth's chances. I think that the limited time in between games isn't going to matter that much. I think, if Cape comes to play, they're going to do just fine. But Wells is fired up about this opportunity too. And, Levitt, there's Levitt looming on the other side of the bracket. And of course, they're going to have to get by a Chevrers team that's going to play them tough. But I think it's so compelling on so many levels, this Cape Wells matchup, and not just what happens on the field. It's there's been a lot leading up to this game, and I can't wait to see some of the post-game reaction after it's played.
Mike, real quickly, how about the job Cape did to blow out a Freiburg team that's upset a lot of teams this year on such short notice with everything going on?
Yeah, I mean, that was remarkable. I thought that maybe Cape would be limited. They had about 25 guys for the game, but a lot of them weren't 100%. But, and it was close for half. I mean, Freiburg pulled within 12-8 in the second quarter, but, what Cape Elizabeth did is they drove for a touchdown before halftime. It gave them a little breathing room, and then it was all Capers in the second half. And, they touched the ball 7 times. They scored on all 7 drives. They had some meticulous drives. They really didn't even throw the ball that much. It was a pretty vanilla attack, and I just don't think they had a whole lot of life in them. So it was as simple as, quarterback Mike Foley, you're going to keep the ball. Nick Laughlin, you're going to get the ball on several occasions. Let's make the most of it. And, Cape doesn't have to be exotic to win. And that's why I think even with the limited amount of time between games that they're confident going to Wells just because they're really fired up and they know they have a lot to play for.
Okay. That's going to do it for us this week. Be sure to check out varsitymaine.com for all the best high school sports coverage in the state. We'll have coverage from all these state championship games, all these high school football playoff games. For Michael, I'm Travis. Thanks for joining us this week on Varsity Maine Live.
Everybody.